You ever had one of those moments where you confidently announce that you're going to become a herbalist, and then maybe a week later, your kitchen looks like a cross between Santa workshop, a medieval apothecary, and a crime scene involving beeswax? Because that's been my week. Now, I started this herbal experiment thinking I'd make a few teas, try my hand at making ointments, but instead, I've somehow become the owner of herbs and simmering oils and tinctures and salves and rose water and tea bags and approximately 17 projects that all need attention at the exact same time. No, my children officially dubbed this phenomenon the Project Apocalypse, and honestly, they're not wrong. But somewhere along the line, I realized that I was having fun, right? Between adding a little too much beeswax to myself, which, by the way, are now closer to some luxurious balms, and I love it. But I was having so much fun because the house smells incredible. The chamomile is sweet and soft and comforting, and the lavender feels calming. My hands are just soothed in the oils, and the rose. Oh my goodness, rose water, rose infused oil. Those rose things might be the most beautiful things I've ever made. It's remind me that sometimes the process, gives us so many gifts that we weren't expecting. Like I always like the smell of rose, but when you infuse that in some hot water and some hot oils, it just the smell is tantamount. Honestly, I think this is really a pretty good metaphor for perimenopause, right? We're slower, we're sometimes foggier, sometimes we forget our value or our fragrance or our essence. But when we are tried or when it really matters and our character needs to shine, then that's when we are just adding to the essence of the room, to the value of the product. But I digress. The reality is that even if we are sometimes foggy or sometimes we forget why we walk into a room, we can discover our true essence again. We can redefine our value, become more intentional, a little steadier, right? Become less interested in rushing. I've spent so much of my life trying to produce more or to move faster or to do everything, better or more perfectly. But this season keeps teaching me different lessons. Grow slowly, trust the process, that plants don't apologize for taking their time, and that we shouldn't either, right? One of the biggest things I've learned this week is that self sufficiency, especially if it's sacred, isn't about doing everything yourself or faster. It's about remembering that you can do things, right? There's something really deeply grounding about growing a plant and harvesting it and drying it and turning it into a tea or an oil, a massage oil, and, finally creating something that can create comfort for you and your family. And that to me feels very sacred. So to make the infusion, which will later be used with the ointments, I grabbed about half a cup of dried herbs and to 1 cup of carrier oil, whether it's sweet almond oil or olive oil or coconut oil, and I added that into a clean jar. Then I heated up the jar in a water bath for about, I think I did it for about 2 hours to let it slowly infuse. You can also leave it on the windowsill for a couple weeks. Now, once it is infused, you want to strain out all the herb, and then the oil becomes, the foundation for everything else that you're going to do. Now, to make the salve, or in my case, a very luxurious balm, you want to gently warm the infused oil with the beeswax. You want to stir in the beeswax into the hot oil in a water bath, or you can melt it in the microwave. In fact, I did that for a couple of them, and it took about two, depending on the oil. The coconut oil was took longer. but it takes between 2 to 3 minutes to heat it up in the microwave if you're doing just a small amount. So you want to melt the beeswax and the oil together until they melt. You can always test the texture on a cold spoon. If it's runny, then it's, you want to cook, you want to add a little bit more wax. If it's a little too firm, then you want to add a little bit more oil. Once you're okay with the consistency, then you add in the vitamin E oil and any essential oil that you're adding. So I added in some alcohol-free witch hazel as a mild astringent, and then I poured in everything into the tins, let it cool, and then I labeled it. Now, just imagine you can actually make something with your hands that can last for months. And it's simple, it's ancient, it's beautiful. This week reminded me that learning herbs isn't really about collecting recipe. It's about paying attention and, watching, smelling, adjusting, learning, making mistakes, and trying again. It's also a practice in trusting yourself because your body and your life changes and you have to be willing to adjust to that. So over the next few weeks, I'll be sharing, what I'm learning about the different herbs, not because I'm some kind of expert, but because I'm a student who's always inviting people to learn alongside me. So we can talk about the research or traditional uses or, just different things, how they work, the things that don't work. And we can keep on building a modern herbal pantry together if you guys are willing. But there's also one other thing that this season of my life, being in this mode, trying to learn about herbs and perimenopause and self-sufficiency has taught me is that this way of living is not old-fashioned or granny coded. It's sacred, and that maybe the greatest gift we can give ourselves isn't just another product to combat the symptoms of perimenopause. Maybe it's just remembering how capable we are to do things all along. So that's the video this week. As always, guys, be good to yourself and, get yourself some rose oil, girl. Be good to each other. Maybe send each other some chamomile tea or some infused oils, some massage oils. And be blessed, be balanced, be blissful, and be blooming. And I'll see you next week.